Here we go. I don't know what happens. Something happens when I turn it on now with the mixer. That's all right. There's a little bit of fucking around going on in my house right now. Started my stream and now everyone's interrupting it. Thank you. That's too much food, but thank you. Thank you, food slave. Okay. Hi, everyone. Sorry. Everyone. Hi, 1. 2. This is a quiet time of day, and I just like to do it and just talk into the void, so whatever. Great intro. Well done. Natural presenter. Brilliant. Oh, boy. Okay, where do I begin with this disinformation board? Okay. As usual, see, this is where I find myself stuck, I think. Which is, first of all, everyone's fucking here and making noise. Second of all, I'm kind of stuck. I've talked about this before, which is the nature of the machine, which is online content, quality online content like this, like not testing my mixer beforehand, but nonetheless. The problem that we've got when talking about issues that people need to hear about, that are important to talk about, they get swept up, stolen, taken, nicked, fucked with by this bizarre GOP-driven American machine that is the culture wars. And what it does is the second that an issue, like, say, the problem of disinformation, okay, is that the second it becomes politicized, all sanity, all arguments, all facts, all truth, everything becomes a tribal war with insane headlines, outrageous reactions, and no real understanding of the idea that things are complex. They take a long time to explain. There's a lot of history. There's a lot of, like anything that is a global problem, anything that is a political problem, anything that's a policy problem, especially politics. I think this is a problem of religious thinking in general, right? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we actually know about disinformation, because it's something that I know quite a bit about. And unfortunately, because I'm not some polished person who will go, hey, welcome to intro bullshit wanker stuff, right? It's just not my style. You're going to be getting information from people who are better presenters, or people who can write to a 350 word limit, people who will get your attention with headlines, people who will just do whatever it takes to be seen rather than actually address the issue. And unfortunately, these things are complex. They've got history. There's like the history of the internet alone, the political history of the internet alone, in terms of the relationship that the United States government has with the principle of the internet being free, the conflict between the fact that most of this stuff was built by the United States, okay? And over time, obviously that changed, but the technology came out of war, okay? The internet was built out of war. A lot of technological advances are built because of the necessities of war, okay? A lot of the history of computer chips, okay? Again, I'm going to butcher this history because it's, but you just got to understand, it's basically what I'm trying to get through to people is that I could write a book on just the relationship between the United States government, military, war, and how the internet was formed and built, okay? You could do from World War I to 1970. That's a book in itself, okay? You've got the political history, you've got political theory, but the problem with this religious thinking, okay, and applying this religious notion and this simplistic worldview, when you apply that to politics, things are a lot longer. They're a lot more complicated. They're a lot messier than you would have if you're reading, let's say, one fucking book, okay? This is the problem with people, to quote Billy Connolly. Never trust anyone who's only read one book, and that applies as much to politics as it does to religion or anything else, okay? And what we're seeing is this single-minded, single worldview application of theory that actually has a lot of history, a lot of, there's things that are true, there's things that are false, there are facts somewhere somewhere in there, there's a truth, okay? But then there's versions of the truth, there's ideology, there's, all of these competing interests. And the fact is, disinformation is a problem, okay? Also true, disinformation and misinformation, malinformation, those things are politically convenient tools, okay? This problem that we've got with misinformation and disinformation, okay, they're different things, and I'll define them in a minute. The problem that we've got is very similar to the passage of the Patriot Act. If you were around in sort of 2001, around this conversation, which is terrorism. And I've been warning about this. I've been talking about the propaganda model and the 5 pillars of the propaganda model forever, okay? And I've seen this coming, spent the last week sitting in my rightness going, yeah, I'm right. Okay, I predicted that. It's going exactly the way that I would have expected it to, okay? None of this is crazy or unpredictable if you understand what's going on. But in your propaganda model, okay, you've got your 5 pillars. And so what you've got is traditionally it was communism was the enemy, okay. Upgrade your propaganda model, and then it became terrorism. Terrorism became the catch-all in order to pass certain laws, in order to, suppress certain people, to suppress certain groups, and to manufacture consent. Mr. Herman Chomsky, for war and for, capitalism and all of that sort of stuff. But again, it's not a conspiracy theory. It's just, there's a large body of work on how power works and how capital accumulates and how all of these things and interests collide, okay? And you end up here unless... and the thing is that the wheels are going to fall off this. If things are going the way that I've been saying, it's that things are quite precarious. I'm seeing an abuse of power. I'm seeing the same slippery bullshit, okay, that was done in 9/11 with the Patriot Act, okay. It passed a law that sounded reasonable on the surface, but what it did was it allowed, this great global threat of terrorism, okay, to allow for, surveillance, all of this stuff. If you're following what Edward Snowden and all of those people have been saying, none of this is new, okay? Good intentions, the truth, the facts, okay? Fact, we have a problem with terrorism, okay? Also fact, that's been used to mislead people in terms of, to erode civil liberties, okay, and the internet. The war on the internet is really where I'm going here. Another truth, we have a problem with deliberate disinformation, okay. That's a fact, okay. Also true, that's being used to manufacture consent for censorship, surveillance, securitization of people, all of those, that erosion of liberty, okay? If you're not speaking in true and also true, this is true, but this is also true, then you're thinking in terms of, you're kind of stuck in a bubble, right? I'll warm up. You know me. We're friends. You know I talk shit for 5 minutes. I'll warm up. And there's a lot of theory today, so I'm just trying to think about the order in which I talk about these things. Because it's boring for people. And I don't want to go off on too many sort of theoretical tangents. So, if you're not aware, so we've signed globally, okay, there's been a global shift. There's a global commitment to fighting disinformation and misinformation online. Now, what is disinformation? So you got three things. Misinformation, okay. It's very important to understand the difference between these three things, because this is the slippery, this is where this is that sort of stealth passing of, the kinds of laws that allow the institution of fascism that is the United States government to sort of get away with these sort of slippery things. Okay. Misinformation is, let me get up my bucket so I don't misspeak, because this is important. I can remember this stuff, but today, because it's a lot of theory, I don't normally have notes, but I actually am going to have notes a little bit today, just so you can learn a little bit maybe. So so it's about intent, right? The difference between misinformation, disinformation, and then you've got malinformation, okay, which is the more egregious vindictive side. But you've got a scale, there's a degree there. Misinformation is fucking everything that might be a mistake, okay? So it's like unintentionally sharing something that you didn't know was true. It's inaccurate information, so like even just like inaccurate dates. It's even satire being misunderstood and taken as real. That's classified as misinformation. Okay, it's accidental. It's not intentional. There is no intent. You're just misled. So think misled, misinformation. You're mistaken. Okay. Disinformation. Okay, is deliberately fabricated, deliberately false. Okay. There's like conspiracy, the COVID, anti-COVID shit, the conspiracy stuff, okay? Russian disinformation, which is occurring, okay? United States, massive sharer of disinformation, okay? Intentionally creating, sharing things that are false, and that's irrespective of which side of politics you're on in the United States. They're kind of just all right-wingers, and they're all full of shit, and they're all lying to you, and it's all just fucking corrupt. However, one is more corrupt and lies more than the other. Especially the ones that are calling it the Ministry of Truth now. And it's like, you guys are doing, it's so meta, it's crazy. Okay. Disinformation is intentionally sharing false information. Now, because I've had some exposure to the psych research. Like this is I wish I'd started doing this earlier and entering, because I didn't realize how slow the actual research is on this. Okay, people were kind of behind on the back foot with a lot of this stuff. What we're seeing is a lot of research, okay, on misinformation and disinformation that is clearly politically motivated, coming out of the United States, coming out of the same old places. Now, the reason why I like the School of Psychology for this is because the solutions might be in diagnosing the behavior. So when you're focusing on behavior and what's empirically true and what can be measured, okay, yes, it can be like tinkered with, but it's less. I mean, you're not going to get, you're going to get a better sense of where the truth is, where the motivations are, what the conduct is. Okay. Now, I know I'm waffling a little bit, but I'll get to my point. But let me define malinformation first, which malinformation is like sharing of personal information or, what private information. So like doxing, revenge porn, maybe deep fakes would probably fall. I don't know. Deep fakes probably fall somewhere in between the two, but it's for personal gain or personal interest or corporate interest. It's not in the public interest. So Julian Assange would not be considered malinformation necessarily. That's still considered in the public interest. But even some malinformation is like deliberate changing of context. I'd argue that this whole turf stuff or calling out people a Nazi, all those kinds of things, right? That could actually fall under malinformation defamatory shit rather than disinformation. Okay. Because disinformation is more about misrepresenting material facts, and malinformation is more about, that sort. Anyway, too much information. But those three things, those definitions matter when you're talking about something like a disinformation board. Okay, the United States have set up a disinformation board. Now, I'm talking about the United States, mostly because the tech companies are headquartered in the United States. All of the talk about Twitter and Facebook and antitrust and all those things, that conversation is happening in the United States because that's where the tech companies are. We're at the mercy of these guys, okay? And unfortunately, our government, we're at the mercy of US corporations. That's just, we're in that world now. That's just how it is. So unfortunately, I have to focus more on US politics than I would on Australian politics, even though, they're very different, a different political makeup because we actually have a left wing here. And our right wing is still, while they'll use some of the same campaign strategies, they tend to backfire more than they work. And I think people are a little more like, they're in Australia, we're a little less tolerant of negative campaigning. It works on a certain portion of the population. And when you're talking about elections being won in a handful of seats with a handful of voters that swing either way, that will pull the country right. Okay, that's just how it is. Because when you've got this dominant cultural right-wing global force that is America, the United States, that's going to have an impact on the discourse here, and that is going to change the culture and change the zeitgeist to a point where, marginal voters are shifting right, okay? And that's it's called the ratchet effect. I've referred to that before. I've only got just over an hour today, so I might not go too much into ratchet effect, might break that out separately. But when we're talking about disinformation, okay, and this is what I'm pissed off about this, because what you'll see is people just parroting that, the United States have set up a ministry of truth, okay? And it's like, it's not that simple, because the people who are saying this are the biggest purveyors of bullshit. Okay, that's measured. Again, if you look at the data, it's empirically true, and I'm going to explain how this works, okay, this machine that works. So this propaganda machine, okay, it's called there's an asymmetry, right, in terms of the way that the United States media system is set up. Okay, and the ratchet effect is related to it, but it's more, I might break it out separately, which is, okay, here's some fucking facts, first of all. Shit's complicated, it's messy and confusing, and there's a lot of history here that you can never condense into a short stream. Okay, anyone who's pretending that they've got, some sort of easy answer to these problems is not very well informed on these problems. Okay. Big problems. First of all, some facts. This is stuff that is empirically true, okay, based on the growing body of research and research from media and, the psychology of media, social psychology, all those things. This is what we know to be true and predictable. Okay. First up, Republicans in the United States, okay, in particular, but also, the moderate Democrats, because again, you'll see this conservative, they're all conservatives, right? When you understand the the right versus left psychology, the personality factors that go into this sort of worldview and why this sort of politics appeals, okay, is linked to personality. But Republicans are more likely than Democrats, okay? Again, that's less and less true because the Democrats are moving right. So let's just say right versus left to be simple. The right are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories, okay? They are more likely to believe in conspiracy theories, okay? They are more likely to lie in order to win, okay? Fox News is a bubble, and the right tend to exist within an ecosystem and not leave that ecosystem, okay? About a quarter of Americans, and increasingly here as well, the Murdoch ecosystem, the Murdoch rag press. When you are in it, you tend to not leave that ecosystem, okay? Those who are sort of more centre-left, left, even maybe more moderate, whatever, but the far right exist in an ecosystem of a handful of tightly controlled, highly propagandized, highly radicalized, okay? But it's a closed shop, it's a closed loop, and I'll talk about that feedback loop in a minute, okay, and why it's coming from there, and why you need to understand that, because this is why this is complex, okay? Because when they start screaming about the Ministry of Truth, and they start screaming about policy crackdowns on disinformation, okay? When they start screaming about all of this stuff, and when it's obvious the stuff they leave out, okay, it's obvious, okay? If you have a well-rounded understanding of a lot of these issues, and I'm not explaining it very well, but yeah, whatever. The people, let's just say that there's no real Venn diagram between people who can present on TV and people who know what they're talking about. It's an unfortunate, thing. But anyway, just trust me when I say this. Okay, so that's one fact. More likely to believe in conspiracy theories. Okay, a quarter of them are in an ecosystem that they don't leave. Like I said, okay, there is a well-defined, empirically proven. All of the evidence is quite compelling that it is an insular right wing. There is that's insular. Okay, now the right wing are more aggressive. Okay, they tend to lie more. Okay, they tend to exist in a bubble that is an affirming bubble. Now, the nature of this is, there's books on this. There's a book called Network Propaganda that has a lot of this stuff in it. So you can look that up. If you don't want to listen to me, read the book, okay? It's an audio book if reading's hard for you. So they've done, all of the studies around this, you've got your sort of so what you've got is, in terms of political groups, you've got sort of centre, moderate, and left all the way over, okay? What Fox News would call the far left, which is everyone even remotely left of them, okay? Anyone who thinks insulin's too expensive, the far left, okay? People who exist in the Fox News version of the far left, the they that they refer to, okay, is the makeup of that media ecosystem. People tend to consume a wider range of sources, okay? But the landscape is different as well, because you've got a lot more media outlets. They're competing for attention more, okay? They're more like, like the right-wing ecosystem sort of exists in a network of lots and lots and lots of publications, but they're all owned by Murdoch, but they're chiefly run by, you got Fox News, Breitbart, Daily Caller, that whole ecosystem, okay? That exists, but it's somewhat of a closed shop. So when you've done studies, and the psych, what's interesting, what I want to get to is that the psych research actually backs a lot of this up. And this is why it's complicated, because we're actually dealing with how people are in terms of our blind spots, in terms of the way, a lot of this stuff is hardwired, and that's why this disinformation stuff is a complex problem. And anyone who's saying that it's not, okay, it doesn't have that I'm poorly explaining it. They don't have, they don't know what they're talking about. And I don't want to say that, but anyway, it's not simple. When I get, anyway. So with so in terms of the left, okay, so first of all, if you're on the left and you're a journalist, okay, and when I say left, I mean anyone sort of left of Fox News, okay, which is pretty much everyone other than the 25% of fucking radicalized Fox News people. But you'll see this play out online as well. But also why they perceive that they're being censored more. Okay, yes, censorship is happening, but it's not in the way that they're claiming. The conservatives aren't censored. Okay, they're not censored as a group. Okay, their conduct is worse. They lie more. Okay, they tell more bullshit. And it's the same thing when they say that the university system is biased. It's like, well, no, in most cases. Okay, I said most cases, unless you're sort of exploiting, unless you're a bad actor. In most cases, these things are oriented towards the truth and evidence and data and all of these things, so that when they say that university researchers and all these things are biased towards one side, or Snopes is biased against Trump, it's like, no, they just bullshit more. So then they turn around and pretend play victim. It's again, if you were around with this whole, when the evangelicals were going nuts with George Bush, right, with the election. This happens here as well. This whole Christians are being persecuted narrative, where they are the primary people. They conduct themselves in a way that the rules will disproportionately affect them because they conduct themselves in a certain way. Okay, I've experienced this. Anyone who's been online for 5 minutes and said anything remotely left-wing has seen the pylon that occurs, okay? That's anyway, it's a side. But on the right, okay, so when you've got sort of the left, or, anything sort of, left of Fox, okay, in the media ecosystem, there's those people that have that tension between how they make their money, okay, what pays the bills, and being a journalist. Like, there's that constant tension. Not in all cases. Some people are just bought and sold and will say whatever. That's a different aspect to that. That's not the left. That's the nature of the incentives and the business model, all that stuff that I'll talk about after. But in that sort of center, left ecosystem, okay, the outlets compete for attention. It's a highly saturated, very competitive marketplace. And you'll see that. That's why these publications just go super woke to get their audience, right? And then you've got sort of the more, but they're always sort of, there's more, people move around. I mean, I read widely, I read everyone. Okay. But they also, because of that, because it's highly competitive and because people tend to have, on the left, more of an interest in, again, not in all cases, but, there's still that corruption layer, okay? But generally speaking, this is empirical, this is what the research shows, which is that on the left, they kind of tend to fact check each other more because it's a more competitive space, okay? Now, it tends to be more oriented towards truth and integrity and ethics and all of that sort of that sort of unwritten code, because a lot of that stuff comes from the left, believe it or not. Now, but because there is that tension between the business model and the duty of a journalist, some there's just that natural gravitating towards fact checking or calling out someone, or accusing someone else of being corrupt, or accusing the other journalists of being dishonest. Also because the US mainstream media landscape is largely geared towards neoliberal capitalism and all that stuff. All the jobs are there, so there's always that dissonance. There's always that conflict that exists within, working as a lefty, like me in tech, working as a lefty in tech, seeing what's being done to users. Right-wingers don't give a shit about that stuff. They don't give a fuck about ethics towards users, because the business model is not causing a conflict there, okay? They're using it, okay? Yes, they're using it because it's useful. But again, when you look at how the left and the right are linked to personality factors and worldview and all that stuff, they're cool with capital. They're cool, right? Making money and dog eat dog, and oh well, the users should know better. That's that sort of conservative worldview, okay? That we are in that individual responsibility, and that people who billionaires earn their way there. You just need to work harder. You're not exploited. You just need to try harder. And that trickles. That's the only thing that fucking trickles down is that worldview, okay? Which is that users, okay, and you'll see that coming from these guys, which is that you won't hear them saying what I say, which is that I didn't sign that contract. I didn't sign this contract. All that stuff. That's not the kind of shit that they'd be talking about, okay? They're fighting for their right to spread bullshit on these platforms, okay? That's what they're fighting for, because they're being, squeezed and squeezed and squeezed and less able to spread the bullshit. Now, I'm not saying that the US government doesn't also spread bullshit and that everyone's not trying to spread their own bullshit. I'm just talking about that particular line of the group of people are an echo chamber. They are a filter bubble, and they have more bullshit than the other side. Okay, they tend to be. It's a bullshit war, but go on. But the right, because they don't have that tension between the business model and what they do. Okay, it doesn't mean that they necessarily lack ethics. It means that they just don't see a problem with it. They don't see a problem with. They don't see it through the lens of exploitation. They don't see it through the lens of power. They don't see it through the lens of, it's just not their lens, okay? And again, I'm not arguing either way. I'm just saying that they tend to bullshit more. And that's the model. Now, and this is here you go, here's another thing that's true. That ecosystem is less focused, and this is again measurable, less focused on correction, okay, like truth. It's not oriented towards truth. It tends to be oriented towards ideology and partisan narrative, okay? Again, there's variance on this, but they're not necessarily focused on the whole truth. And I've noted, this is what I've been writing about with, when I first sort of delved into this stuff, and I started saying, okay, they're missing some stuff. James Lindsay's missing some stuff. Ben Shapiro's missing some stuff. What they're doing is it's actually cherry picking and leaving it out for narrative purposes. It's deliberate, okay? Not a blind spot. It's not ignorant. They know, okay? And that's the thing, is that they're actually it's spin, okay, in order to promote some sort of narrative that there's a far left, who think $300 of, for insulin is too much, and, that you should maybe invest in roads, and maybe things are a bit shit, okay? But what they'll do is quibble over fucking details. So that ecosystem tends to focus more on purity, okay? Again, that's just measurable stuff. And also when you actually are in pursuit of truth, or present some truth that is uncomfortable and goes at odds with that broader narrative, okay? And I've experienced this as well, which is that they tend to punish you or not ask you back. I've talked about this before. There's that sort of punishment. So if you challenge them in a way, so that's why I think the criticism of people like, that claim they're on the left, being on Fox News, this is that useful thing that I've talked about before, where, if you're if you're invited back, you're useful somehow, even if you're not aware of it, and you might be talking from the left or from a left-wing perspective. If you do anything that is not useful, generally you'll find that you are not welcome back. And the reason for that is this is all like, there's some psychology behind this, right? Which is that when you look at the makeup of the audience, with that tendency to, be more conspiratorial, tendency towards, religious thinking, magical thinking, tendency to, that sort of running through the veins of the United States is that sort of Puritan, that Puritanism and work ethic, and, that vein of conservatism that is just quite unique to the United States, televangelism, all of that kind of stuff, right? I'm trying to but the audience, it's not even, see, none of this is actually, when I make these claims, there's no real, I try to be independent. This is the problem, is that when you talk about facts and policy and truth and what the evidence is, everyone's mad at you, especially the right. And what happens is that you get accused of being partisan just for speaking the truth, or you get accused of being some, whatever. Okay, this is what disinformation does. If you are speaking a truth, okay, and someone is accusing you and engaging in ad hominem attacks about that aren't related, or derailing you, or trying to pull you away from a truth or something that has got evidence, okay, there's a good chance that that's, fucking with you and trying to persuade you and nudge you in a certain direction. But the right-wing audience, okay, so that Fox ecosystem, that 25% of that insular network, okay, the bubble, and I'm not saying there aren't other bubbles, I'm just, just addressing this one, which is that they tend to abandon the outlets, which, again, I've noticed this, right? People were throwing super chats. They throw super chats at you if you affirm their worldview. And if you affirm that and affirm that and affirm that and affirm that, they will reward you. But if you challenge that in any way, or you poke that dissonance, they disappear, okay? And that's a behavior that I've known to be true. I've seen that. I've tested it for myself using, on my own stuff. The second you sort of diverge even just a little from that sort of culture wars narrative, they abandon the audience. But what that does is the business model fuels this, because what it does is it puts the networks and the media, puts them over a barrel. Because what they are is, because their entire business model, you see how this worldview feeds itself. Because what happens is that because you've got an audience that are prone to wanting to, well, we all do, okay? I'll talk about this in a minute, which is the psychology behind this stuff. It's really interesting. But because us as humans, we tend to seek out information that affirms our worldview and avoid information that challenges it, okay? Makes us very uncomfortable. It's called cognitive dissonance. I'm sure you know about it. But it's just, that's very uncomfortable. It's quite painful, and that is well established, okay? But what we're seeing is that the punishment and the discomfort and the emotional reaction and the the moral outrage is the word I was trying to think of. Okay, so research around moral outrage online and how that can be a self-perpetuating problem is that the right are more prone to censor, silence, and that's again why I think that this woke thing is inherently right wing, because that there is it's more complicated than that, because once you add in other stuff, which I'll get to in a minute. But I'm just trying to explain that this audience abandonment thing, okay, and the business model, okay, because your business model is around retention of audience, okay, making sure that you have built a tribe of truth. Like the thing that makes you money is the thing that radicalizes, and the the more that you radicalize the audience, okay, the more that they're going to punish you if you don't comply with their worldview, okay, and also what they're going to do is, because those presenters have no real sense of responsibility or duty of care towards users, they see them as consumers. They see that consumers, as free agents to freedom of choice. Okay, they don't feel that sense of responsibility towards their audience that maybe the left will. Okay, and that's not a lack of ethics; it's just a different worldview. They lack my version of ethics. I'm sure that they think that my swearing and lack of adherence to God and Puritan values is egregious to them. That's just different worldviews. Okay. The language that I use is not ideal. See, this is the problem when you make everything a freaking religious war and a political war, is that politics has become so much ingrained in people's identity that every disagreement is now an attack on someone's self, and that's where we're going. Okay. Now, so the ratchet effect. So if you think of, I don't know if you know what a ratchet is. Just quickly, because this is what's happening, is that we're just being pulled and pulled and pulled. And I think that people need to understand that it's not even necessarily a conspiracy. It's just, think of it like, so I don't know if you know, but a ratchet is like one of those gears. I don't fully understand it in engineering, but what it does is it only allows, it's a cog that only allows things to be pulled in one direction. Okay. So in terms of ideology or economics or, society only moves in one certain direction unless there's some massive, massive correction, okay? And so the internet, we're being pulled right constantly, okay, because of the nature of things. So, but all right, so this is what we know. Biases are stronger, okay? So the nature of moral, political, anything, emotional, anything that's like emotionally charged that is deep around, the nature of being, morality, politics, religion, those things, those biases tend to be stronger, okay? So any bias that you have, okay, the likelihood that you're going to seek out information that is affirming, comforting rather than difficult and exhausting, okay, psychologically speaking, okay, or emotionally speaking, you're going to go with the easier option at all times. The reason why we form patterns, okay, is for economy, okay. This is why this whole thing about stereotypes being, being aware of implicit bias is one thing, and trying to work on that heuristic, but saying that all bias and all stereotypes and those things are inherently bad is not fair either. Okay, this is why this stuff gets weaponized. Okay, it's why, and because it's just how we survive. Okay, I can tell you that it's exhausting doing my job, trying to be fair and reasonable and hear everyone out and understand everything and giving everything a sort of charitable read as best as I can. That's really, really, really exhausting work, okay? Because also everyone accuses me of being like far right and far left just for seeking truth, okay? But that's how, this is just how this thing goes. It's part of the job. Another thing we know that is measured, okay, and it's one thing that just we know from social psychology, which is that moral contagion, okay, which is outrage, anything that's sort of anything that's attached to morality, okay, moral contagion is higher, okay, within political in-groups, okay. Now, negative emotions tend to spread within, and you'll see this play out with that sort of the MAGA side or whatever the fuck you want to call them, GOP, that Shapiro universe, right? Marvel, the multiverse that is the internet. But negative emotions, right, tend to spread within about outgroups, right? So what you've got, so I'm not explaining this well. So you've got in-group, out-group. if, let's say, you've got the sort of this whole culture war thing, you've got the MAGAs and you've got the wokes, to be simplistic about it, okay? There's a very clearly defined in-group and out-group there, okay? So with the wokes, the out-group are whatever they perceive to be the Nazis, okay? Whatever they perceive, okay? But the in-group is everyone who's in this little bubble, this echo chamber of like critical, all this stuff. And over here you've got your sort of your MAGAs, your Fox News ecosystem, MAGA fucks, okay? Your Tucker Carlson cult, okay? And what they are, so you've got the outgroup to them is this enemy over here, like the wokes, okay? The 4chan versus Tumblr war, okay? But to them, they've got their in-group, which is, Fox News. Now, so negative emotional messaging about the other group, okay, tends to spread more within the group, okay? So you'll see that play out all the time. What have they done now? That's the whole dynamic. And so what we know is that the numbers are in that, okay? So, I don't talk about this stuff. This is stuff that I sort of more consult on, and it just sort of guides my work. It's not something I'm teaching as such. I need to change that. But this is what the research says, which is that if you are slagging off the other guy, you'll see this play out. Russell Brand, Jimmy Dore, they're always talking about what the other guys are doing as big part of their it's pandering to the base, okay? They're always talking about some sort of they, that's why the verified anonymous YouTube channel is hilarious, because knowing well and truly that anonymous, it's sort of co-opted by the US government and intelligence. It's quite funny to see that they're obviously studying these radicalization tracks or working with YouTube to study that track, because you'll notice that they create these deliberately vague videos that talk about some sort of they, but you can see how it would be, it's sort of people will see what they want to believe. So it's an interesting, very interesting thing to watch. Okay, if you understand this stuff, that people are just looking for things that confirm their worldview about some sort of they. So if you believe in the Great Reset, you're going to see the Great Reset. If you believe that the Nazis are coming, you're going to believe that. And it's very cleverly manipulated and done, that content, and it's funny. To me, I find it funny. Because it's obvious what they're doing is that they're using that stuff as to study the funnel into radicalization, right? But we also know that when you do positive messaging, okay, like about the other side, positive messaging about the out group, okay. So if you're Fox News and you do something positive, or in that fucking weird land where something positive would come out about the other side, what that tends to do is it tends to disperse that bubble. Okay, so that's why you'll see that emphasis on bad news and why those. Again, there's a tendency to sorry, hang on, I lost my words. Let me have a drink. Hang on, lost my words. So, because that audience has a tendency to abandon anybody who sort of challenges the worldview, and again, that's just something that's measured. I'm just pointing out what the studies say. Okay, now, and it's for a number of different factors. And if you don't feel that sense of responsibility towards your users, okay, or your community, or you think that your community is a rational being who can just make decisions and you don't have any personal responsibility, you're just providing a service, again, that's a worldview. It's not a judgment, it's just how it is. Which is that you're knowing that you're going to be, abandoned if you sort of challenge that. Okay. And again, this isn't conscious. This is just working. A lot of it is just working in the subconscious. Okay. Nobody is sitting there going, oh, well, fuck them. No, I don't think that anyone's really going, fuck them. I tend to believe that we're good. Everyone's good. Okay. But positive content or positive emotional content tends to spread and across tribes and sort of disperse them. That's why you very rarely see it. But the business model because of that highly competitive, oversaturated, dying institution that is the US mainstream media, okay, they can't control stuff. And so they're desperately trying to hold their audiences. And so what I see this is, think of it more as a phenomenon than a conspiracy, okay, which is that they're going to create this reward system and punishment system where if you speak out or you say something that, you end up a cam girl, basically. Okay, you end up going, okay, yep, there, Trump's great, yeah, rah, 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 money, clicks. There's a clear reward and incentive there to do that, okay? And that's observed and measured. And if you do anything positive about the other side or anything charitable about the other side, that will make people either be more exposed to the competition or, abandon you and completely, right? Or abandon you further into the deep, dark conspiracy land of, fucking full tinfoil QAnon shit, okay? So they will stop. So this is the role that Fox News have. And Joe Rogan, this is where he's interesting because he is kind of a case study in how delicate this can be and why I'm going to write about his responsibility at some point, because I've talked about the small percentage of people who double down, okay, and disappear. But so when you are reasonable and they abandon you for other things, that radicalization funnel becomes a very real problem, okay, and that's why sometimes fence sitting or dabbling in this stuff, it can de-radicalize. Like I think Russell Brand on balance probably de-radicalizes. Jimmy Dore probably de-radicalizes to an extent. But again, these are things that are a responsibility and it needs to be front of mind, okay? The evidence and the research needs to be front of mind on this stuff. Okay. So now, this is another thing that we know, that in extremist groups, outrage expression is more common, okay? So it's more about outrage all of the time, and also it tends to be less sensitive to feedback. So once you get to a certain point in these groups, okay, that people start to behave in a way that they are no longer taking in social feedback, and that reward system becomes an internal one where you are now so I guess corrupted is probably not the right word, but you're compromised. Your reasoning is compromised. You're not taking in social cues because you are convinced of this other, and that other gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger. Okay, so and that makes you less sensitive to feedback, and what that means is that you're also less sensitive to mind changes. You're less sensitive to what was I saying? But also punishment. So everything becomes about that. Every Twitter suspension is not an algorithm because you did Tim Pool, you're a retard. But it becomes about some big, vast conspiracy that is, that's targeting you specifically, and that everyone's against you, and and unfortunately big tech and everyone is feeding that message. And this is the challenge that we've got, is there's a psychological phenomenon that is inherently human being run by things that are not human and are doing sort of damage. They're trying to fix one problem and creating a whole other problem over here. And this is why the disinformation stuff is important. So I'm not going to go into too much detail because I've got to go in like 20 minutes. But so remember that this negative stuff tends to affect your So when you're consuming a lot of negative information all of the time, okay, this is why you should clean your social media feeds and try to consume more positive media, or switch it off altogether. Go outside, get sun, go for a walk. I know that sounds like silly advice, but it works, okay? This is true, which is that when you're consuming negative information all the time, it affects your reasoning, okay? It doesn't just affect your mood, okay? It affects your mood as well and your worldview, but it also affects your capacity to reason because you're in a state of constant arousal, okay? And that affects your reasoning. You're in fight or flight. So the interesting thing about the research with this stuff, and it is linked to disinformation and misinformation, okay, is that this whole system is just this beast of unintended consequences, because I think that what we thought was that the internet was different from real life. And unfortunately, what we're seeing is every psychological weakness that humans actually have having been weaponized in varying ways. So the rewards in the system that we've got right now, okay, and why no one's watching me, okay, is because there's two ways, okay, that people sort of learn in an online community, okay. One of them is, and this is why I want to do the course on responsible influence, because I think that maybe I might be able to appeal to some of these sort of centrist sort of people who do still feel a sense of responsibility to their community, but don't have that the sort of they intuitively understand it, but they don't necessarily know the other stuff underneath it. I assumed that this was known. Okay, again, it's just there's things that you assume people know, and then they don't know it, and you go, oh, you don't know that, okay. So, and I've had to sort of refresh on theory too, because this is just intuitively what I've taught over the years, but I need to kind of figure out a way to reach those that can't be necessarily reached with the arguments that I've used before, which is this idea that you've got a responsibility and an obligation and a duty of care, like to your audience. Like there's a whole cohort of people who don't believe in that, they don't see it that way. So it's a bit, that's where it's tricky. So they learn in two ways, which is one, by observing the community, okay? And this is where, I'll start with the first one because the first one's easier. So you've got the reinforcement, basic reinforcement, okay? So if you behave in a certain way, likes, subscribes, feedback, money, you behave in a certain way, you are rewarded and punished, to conduct yourself in a certain way. We know that moral outrage, okay, that the reason why there's outrage in more communities than others is because people are rewarded in those communities for certain types of outrage. And you can see how this right-wing echo chamber sort of occurs, which is because you, first of all, they're more likely to believe in conspiracies, more likely to be, to believe bullshit, more likely to be, feeling sort of persecuted because it's more attached to their identity, okay? There's all of these things, okay, that sort of collide in when you go into a community. And I thought, this is something that I just went in and I tested, right? And I saw what happened. I went, oh, yeah, let's do some outrage. Like, retweet, like, retweet, like, retweet, like, retweet, like, retweet. If you say something that is in-group, out-group, anti-woke, in-group, out-group stuff. This is why James Lindsay, I don't even know if he believes what he's saying, but he's a case study in that, which is he just full, and Tim Pool, like it's predictable, okay, which is that there's a certain, quarter of the population in the United States and increasingly in other countries as well, anywhere where there's that Fox News ecosystem, they've perfected this model over time, okay. But there's this sort of self-affirming bubble that punishes you when you disagree with them, but rewards you and doubles down when you affirm that view. And but the reinforcement for the creator is there as well, because they're taught that certain behavior gets them certain rewards. It's like that quite simply has been measured and proven to be true in online communities as much as anywhere else. Okay, so the incentives. Okay. The other way people learn is through observing norms in the community. So if you, as a community leader, this is why I've got this view that community admins and moderators and stuff need training, because this stuff, the way that you model and the culture that you build in that community will determine what rewards and punishments exist organically throughout the community as it grows. Okay, so this is why I set certain rules. I don't put up with certain things because I don't want to tolerate certain, I don't want to reward certain behavior. Okay, but that also sets a sort of standard and a norm across the community that there's an expectation that you'll behave a certain way. Okay. And people learn by observing others. That's in online communities. So they observe the behavior and they sort of behave how the rest of the hive behave. Okay, so that's that. So again, that's quite simply how it works. Now remember that the media's mission is always to get eyeballs, to get clicks, to get ads. Okay. Now, actually, one of the interesting things that I forgot to mention was when you have more norm learning, okay, which was what I meant before, which is learning by observing others in the community and through culture and through observing norms, okay. This applies in online communities as well, which is what you'll see, and there's a couple of studies on this, but what you'll see is that if there is more norm learning in that community where people are sort of, leaning on each other, modeling certain behaviors, setting certain expectations, setting community guidelines, making sure that it's very clear what the expectations are and setting those norms in that community. There's less reinforcement. Okay, so the norm is actually more influential in how someone conducts themselves in an online community, okay, than that reinforcement. That reinforcement loop, okay, that you've got, it's basic operant conditioning, right? You've got that series of incentives and punishments and rewards, all that sort of stuff, right? That existing within a community of sort of attention seeking and trying all this stuff, doing all these things, what you'll see is that that's probably a symptom of there being no real cohesive culture or norm or set of guidelines or standards around that community. So it's really interesting stuff. But anyway, that's a bit boring. But you'll see how these things feed each other when you're talking about something like disinformation. Okay, this is big stuff. I'm not explaining it well. Never do. But but remember that as humans, we're drawn to outlets that are more confirming of our worldview. I am too. I don't like reading that bullshit. I hate it. It annoys me. I can only watch like a little bit of it before I start getting upset. That's a human thing, okay? It doesn't mean you're closed-minded. It doesn't mean anything. It's a human response to not it's hard work emotionally and psychologically to hear stuff that challenges who you are as a person. Now, remember that the media's mission is for eyeballs, clicks, money. That's the model. The business model is clicks. Okay. But remember that people are also not really very well educated politically. They don't know what they're talking about most of the time. The reason why people love conspiracies is because it makes politics, it packages complex shit up into something simple. Okay. So with low political literacy, you've got simple answers. Okay. You've got one bad guy, this narrative of, sort of one answer. There's one worldview. You've got one book. Okay. There's one enemy, one outgroup, and it's just some vague them rather than you, okay? That's the language that Fox News use is some sort of, they talk to you and refer to a them. That's a sign that you're being manipulated, okay? Not that simple, okay? But what you end up on, so they basically end up having this sort of affirming bubble where there's this, attacking opponents because they get punished and lose viewers and people turn off if they're not attacking the opponents. And if they do anything nice for the opponents, there's a risk that they might actually, this is the role of someone like Fox News or Joe Rogan or someone like that, okay? And that's that responsibility, which is that if you pay lip service to the outgroup, okay, there is always that risk that those people who are more radicalized will abandon you and go somewhere further, okay? So there's many things true at once. And you've seen that I've argued in different directions on various things depending on what we're talking about. But when we're talking about disinformation and whether it's even a problem and how the Ministry of Truth, they're lying to you, okay? Again, when I say they, I mean just, the key figures who are running this shit show, okay, of Ministry of Truth and, how it's Orwellian. And it's like, no, do you know what is Orwellian? You're doublespeak, you're lying, you're redefining things, okay? And it's like, well, no, hang on, this is actually a problem. if you're being charitable, especially in things like this disinformation, or if you're actually a good actor and a good faith person on this issue, you will not be like, using this issue to sort of demonize an other and make it simple, because it's far from simple. And there's a lot of very compelling evidence that this is a very big problem. And the reason why these guys are fighting it is because they know that a lot of it is because they're bullshitting to their audience and they're worried. It's the same thing as why people are opposed to Elon Musk buying the Twitter thing, and no one mentions the fact that he wants to deal with the bots and the troll farms, is because they know that the place is 40% fucking troll farms and bots, if not more than that. Okay. And that's the problem, is that, the interests. Okay. You need to be willing to look past your own biases. Okay. And it's hard. Okay. I've got my own, of course. Anyone who's claiming to be unbiased whilst peddling simple answers and telling you the truth while they're lying, they're probably lying. Okay, that's things are complicated, but the evidence can change, but the evidence is quite compelling in the area of disinformation. And I'll talk about why I have a problem with the US government muddying the waters and definitions, because that's where we're heading with this Patriot Act style messaging that is deeply concerning. And this is why you need to pay attention to this stuff. Okay. But there's a reduced psychological cost with consuming content constantly that affirms your worldview. Okay. I know this about me. I don't like there's a joke with me and Paul. I don't like new shows. I resist new shows. I like watching things I'm familiar with. I tend to do that. But but that's because so much of my day is spent seeing shit that I don't agree with, or shit that makes me uncomfortable, or shit that makes me angry, and shit that is challenging to my worldview all day, every day. When I watch TV, I want to watch something that doesn't hurt so much. And I know that's, it's just funny that I resist watching. I won't watch a movie. I want to watch a movie that I have heard about or know about. I know this. I'm like that too. Okay, we all are. But remember, you also get dopamine from good news. So there's that weird, you get, it's less psychological, a reduced psychological cost in hearing stuff familiar, but also hearing something affirming, you get that hit of dopamine. Okay. So it's rewarding. When you see the woke M&M's bits, or the those things, all this fucking culture wars nonsense that's always going on. They're getting those hits, but it's also just, it's easy content. It's I joke and say that I'm watching my stories on YouTube, because it's basically like watching Bold and the Beautiful. It's predictable. It goes in cycles. It never changes and all that stuff, right? It's my stories. I don't take it as truth or news like most people, right? So, but what happens is that they create this thing where this constant rage bait, where they're attacking the opponents, creating this bubble, and it's very difficult to leave, because when you see how this cult psychology sort of manifests in these in the culture wars and why it works. But how it works is that it keeps everyone distracted from the actual real policy problem here, which is, first of all, that disinformation is a real problem, because disinformation relies on all of these weaknesses, okay? Because but what happens is that you actually also, there's a paradox here, which is that if you are someone who's between worlds, right, like me, I watch all of it, I consume all of it, I'm fairly, I'm agnostic on most things, I know all of this stuff, okay, I'm fairly immune to it. I play with it. I deliberately give things that are important slightly negative sentiments, or, things that are sensitive, negative sentiment and positive. I play with sentiment all the time, okay? But that doesn't work much anymore, because Twitter's obviously gaming the algorithms and put me on an naughty list somewhere. But generally speaking, I can play with sentiment. But what happens in this bubble is that you end up in this thing where it's constantly trying to it creates an ecosystem that is built on attacking an outgroup. Okay, and that exists on the other side as well. It's the same thing. I'm just focusing on where the compelling an overwhelming amount of evidence is, which is that that's happening within that Fox, sort of Tucker Carlson, Ben Shapiro ecosystem more. Antifa, all that stuff. But you end up stuck in it. Even if you are, and I've seen this, and I've experienced it, which is that I'm now out to dry because you end up stuck in it. Because to be heard in those areas, you have to conform to saying the things that attack the outgroup. Okay, so you can't really fence it. You can't be charitable you can't go on Fox News being charitable to the woke stuff and explain what it is. You can't go on and be charitable because you have to be attacking the outgroup in order to be included in that in-group. And so the nature of the beast is that this just keeps polarizing. That's how we keep polarizing and why most people probably just disengage. Okay. But it's just a continuous feedback. So to be confirmed, you must conform to the worldview, or at least pretend to, okay? But then you've got the reward system in place. So you start making money, you start getting, offers of money, offers of projects, you get that love bomb, okay? From the right, that love bomb works, okay? This is the love bomb I'm talking about. Again, it works on the other side too, but I'm just focused on what I've experienced from going from being sort of, left-wing, moderately left-wing, always left-wing, to suddenly sort of going, oh, what's this thing over here? This is weird. Let's have a look. So I'm just talking about my experience and what I know from research, which is that it rewards those bias confirming statements. So then you find yourself, and this is what you see this with Jimmy Dore, Russell Brand. You see that that little nudge is there, which is that they're rewarded because we're doing A/B testing and we see what gets views and we see what gets the most amount of interest. And what happens is that the creator rationalizes it as going, oh no, I'm just being reasonable, but they don't realize that they're being nudged. Because this is all stuff that operates on the self. This is not conscious. No one's sitting there. Some are, obviously, because there's people who have manuals dedicated to this stuff. How to do this, how to do this, how to do this. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking about from even just for the organic, not the troll farm stuff, but the organic stuff, okay, where the creator can be radicalized or nudged without even realizing that they're being nudged in a certain direction. It's like a self-perpetuating feedback loop, okay? So it's self-reinforcing, okay? But then what that does is because that's that self-reinforcing and that you're sort of being pulled into this in-group and you're having to pander to the out-group, so the out-group are pissed off, the out-group see you as their out-group, and suddenly you've got this polarization where you have no home over here because you've had to say this over here to get traffic over here, and then you're stuck in that ecosystem, and then you end up with low trust in the external media, okay? Like the Fox News, they're always talking about the mainstream media. How the fuck Tucker Carlson and Fox News aren't mainstream media? Oh, no one's ever been able to tell me, because they're like number one fucking cable news. Like, how the fuck are they the victims here? But anyway, but basically they end up, because they've inadvertently been nudged into this in-group, out-group psychology that's innately, it's just human, it's just who we are. It's human foibles, okay? There's nothing, again, outside of the troll farms, okay? If we're human to human and we're operating in a way that is organic, okay, we've got these weaknesses, okay? This is how people get nudged in this direction, okay? But how bad actors can also exploit that, which is to manipulate certain people and certain high-profile creators in certain directions, okay, while they rationalize the whole time and think that they're sitting on both sides. Okay? Because unfortunately, when you've got this completely polarized landscape, there is no such thing really as both sides because of the business model that is rewarding in-group, out-group, because the largest amount of clicks, the largest amount of traffic, the largest amount of especially money, not clicks, okay, so the ad revenue model, yes, but those who put money down, okay, they're going to be the ones who really, really believe what you're saying and believe in you and believe everything you're saying. So if you're bullshitting people for money, okay, or misleading people for money, there's a massive ethical problem there, okay? Now, that's another thing about sort of the left and right thing, is that the left tend to feel a bit of guilt about that stuff. The right don't. The right go, oh yeah, fuck it, every man for themselves. I'm just making money. That's how I make money. The left at least feel like me. I feel icky about it. I don't like to, ask people to become a patron. It becomes necessary because you got to live. It's like, ugh. There's none of that existing necessarily on the right. They don't feel dirty about it because their worldview is, work hard, hustle, make money. Everyone is responsible for themselves. I'm not responsible for anyone else. That's just, again, a worldview that I don't share. But remember that because they don't see, you end up existing in a world that isn't complex anymore. It's always focused on the out-group. Okay, it's always focused on what those other guys are doing. Always. Okay, because that's where the money is. Now, I've said that 17 different ways, 17 times. So, but again, you can see how but the interesting thing about when the research around the Fox ecosystem versus sort of the far left, the rest of us, right, is that the nature of the way this works is that once one party does it, okay, once you've got one hyper-partisan media outlet like Fox News, what it does is it creates this system and setup where everyone else is on the back foot and they sort of control the narrative. So they're pulling that narrative. And that's sort of a version of what the ratchet effect is in politics as well, which is that you're constantly being pulled towards those who are, who set the bar, they set the standard, they set the, so all of the money gets sucked in that direction. All of the votes, all of the stuff, everything sort of pulls towards that because all of the incentive is there to lie and deceive and be more theatre than fact and, promote ideological purity rather than complexity, give simple answers because simple answers are a lot less work than actually going, okay, this thing is true and this is true, okay, such as disinformation is a problem, but I think that this is a bad idea because I don't trust the people who are, I don't necessarily trust someone who is slipping in misinformation when they're talking about disinformation, and they're very different things. Because I've noticed Jen Psaki a few times, now it could just be a misspeak. But history tells us, if you're a scholar of history, will tell you that they've been slippery. And if you're in the White House communications team and you are the spokesperson for the US government, nothing you say is accidental, okay? And she has a responsibility to get those words correct because she's using misinformation when she hopefully means disinformation, because misinformation means a misunderstood joke that someone took literally, okay? Misinformation means mistaken sharing, okay? That's a problem. Now, there's ways you can intervene with misinformation too. I'm hoping that there's ways to do that work, and maybe they mean that they're working with tech companies to help prevent, the sharing, the accidental sharing. But I have no evidence to indicate that this won't be used for nefarious purposes, like censorship of people that they don't like and calling it misinformation. We've seen them doing this all the time. If we hadn't seen this stuff before, it would, I'd be more charitable, but it just sounds like bullshit. But it's not what the right's saying. It's not Ministry of Truth. This is a real problem. They're liars. They are the largest purveyors of disinformation and conspiracy theories and radicalization and bullshit. They are well-funded, well-organized, and they continually radicalize everybody and pulling everyone to the right and making everyone stupid because they're stuck in these filter bubbles and not thinking straight and not reasoning because they're all in fucking lizard brains, okay? But, once this stuff is established, you can see this in-group, out-group paranoia and panic. It becomes like to even try to debunk this stuff. There'll be people who go, well, they don't watch it because they abandoned me the second I said anything that didn't confirm their worldview. Same thing with the TERFs. They're radicalized. That's how you know they're radicalized, is that if you abandon someone the second they say something that you don't like, or try to censor someone the second they say something you don't like, that's a problem. That's a sign that you might be radicalized, okay? Yes, it's discomfort, it's uncomfortable and normal and rational, but if you're doing that a lot, then that's a problem. But you create this setup where, this is why when I say we accidentally built cults, this is what I mean, which is that this in-group, out-group, what it does is it creates this self-affirming and self-reinforcing problem where I go in and say a simple truth like the GOP and the right tend to lie more. Okay, that becomes, oh, she's just a shill for the mainstream media. She's lying. No, I'm looking at the evidence and the studies. Okay, to ignore it. If we ignore an issue, it's a conspiracy. Okay, so if you go, oh, that's silly, and dismiss it, you're in the conspiracy. Okay, this is how QAnon became this bizarre, to engage is risky. Okay, because people they tend to lash out or punish those who try to debate you or challenge them. Okay? This is the problem we've got. Okay, it's effectively deprogramming people, right? To try and debate it is fucking exhausting, and no one will pay me to do it because everyone has, well, not pay me, but pay you. Like as a person, there's no financial or economic incentive to engage in exhausting and tedious debates or put in the effort that is required to sort this problem out. The only people that seem to be appointed to these positions are also people who aren't aware that, they've got other motivations. Okay, this is why I think that psychology and sort of that clinical stuff is probably the better way to look at it. Okay, in terms of radicalization, because it's not dissimilar to cult program, right? And unfortunately, both sides make loads of money, and the people who aren't in this ecosystem do not. They're left out. They're ignored, and also because this stuff trickles down to people everywhere in every institution. You're at the mercy of AI that's programmed to fucking, for one side or the other, not for reasonable people who are just saying facts. So when I say the right lie, or I say that the wokes are like this, or the right's this, or the wokes are this, the rights are this, or wokes are this, or the corporate Democrats are this, I'm perceived by natural language process in AI as someone who is polarizing rather than someone who's just stating a fucking fact that's backed in truth and evidence. So, I think you need to understand that we are all vulnerable to this stuff, which is the selective information seeking. Okay, so there's a really interesting study on this, which is that when looking at community moderators and whether they censor things that they don't like more. Okay, so the biggest indicator that someone is a censor, okay, or will be more likely to delete or block someone or something that they disagree with, okay, is that they have attached a big part of their identity is attached to their beliefs. So if it's a cause that they're really passionate about, okay, so issue-based identity, okay, so let's say vegans, okay, for example, or Christians, okay. As humans, we tend to create environments, social environments that affirm those beliefs, whether that's the suburb you live in, the places you hang out with, your friend groups, okay. My friend groups are weird like that. I've got a more eclectic mix, but generally speaking, we tend to gravitate towards people who affirm our worldview, okay. Our biases tend to seek out, even though we could have the same information in front of us, okay, our biases, our cognitive biases, process that information in favor of an already established view. So you could have the same two sets of facts, the same two stories, and what you'll see is that they will create narratives in our own heads, just in our own heads. Our different parts of our brain light up. It's fascinating shit, okay? Different bits of the brain light up in conservative versus right-wing versus left-wing brains. It's at different times and different states of arousal. It's fucking interesting stuff. We literally interpret objective reality differently based on our predefined ideas, okay, or predetermined, our worldview, okay. And what's really interesting about this in the realm of censorship, so there's a study on whether people will delete or block people from online communities, that challenge the sort of dominant stuff in the group. And what was really interesting is that with those, when they actually, so not only if you attached that issue to your identity or sense of self, okay, that was very strongly fused. They call it fused, okay, fused with your identity. You're more likely to censor opposing views or views that challenge it. But what was actually interesting was that it didn't matter how offensive it was, how egregious it was, whether it was politely poking the dissonance or extreme and violent. They censored in pretty much the same rate and manner and pretty much the same emotional reaction. So that's really interesting part of the study. So if you're blocked for nothing, it's not you really, unless you haven't done anything. It's just, even if you're polite, you may as well have, I'm not saying do this, but I'm saying there's no real measurable difference in how offensive your response was. It was just it was the challenging of that fused identity, that identity quake stuff, right? So you've got a high likelihood of censorship of opposing views with that identity, okay? And that's because, first of all, one of them is that you've got, that you feel a threat, feels threatening, okay, out. But you've also got more conviction, okay? So the more conviction that you've got, the more moral conviction you've got, the more the stronger you feel. This is why this feminist thing is, this TERF thing is quite radicalizing. Just by, even if you don't think so, it is, okay? Just it meets that criteria, because feminism is such a big part of people's identity and worldview, and especially when it's linked to pain and trauma and suffering and that sort of stuff. That's going to be fused with your identity, which means that you're more vulnerable to, that sort of worldview stuff, okay, that sort of out-group stuff. And we're seeing that play out. But yeah, so this stuff is a real problem, and it's based in science. And when you're talking about disinformation and disinformation policy, it's very important, okay? It's very important to be clear about what my concern with this disinformation board, and I've got to go in a minute. My concern with the disinformation board is, first of all, that they're not clear on what it does or is, okay? They're mixing up disinformation and misinformation, which are very fucking different. That's a whole slippery. If they're talking about misinformation, aside from what I've talked about here, which is researching ways to intervene here, okay, because there's it's the timing of it and how to do it and all of that stuff. That's still emerging on what some of the solutions might be. As long as they're referring to that and funding that research, then that's fine. But if we're looking at the security, trust is gone. Trust is gone with a lot of this stuff because it's been abused in the past. And I think that people need to be aware that there's maybe, I wish I had more time and I hadn't spent so much time waffling in the beginning, but that's all right. I've got to go because I've got a meeting. But it's important to pay attention when you're looking at what the facts are around who the good and bad operators and bad faith operators are, what the facts say. Okay, so there is absolute evidence that the right, okay, however you define the right, tend to be more, they're not necessarily censored. If you've gone on these things, you've gone on, Gab and those places, you'll see that they behave horribly, and I don't want them on my platform either. Okay, it's not necessarily censorship of views. It's just there's more misconduct. Okay, and that also, remember, because largely this echo chamber exists and they're more radicalized, that they might not even read the room. They don't even, you see that thing what I said before about not necessarily take the further down the rabbit hole you are, you're less likely to take on any feedback or do any norm learning, because you're not sitting there and observing others' behavior. And also any behavior that you observe or any correction that you get is self-reinforcing that it's like that this out group is out to get you. And this is where Fox News play this narrative really well. I've got to go, and I really want to. I'll go talk about Ratchet stuff later. But I just wanted to check in and do a quick stream because I haven't for a while, and I need to try and do it at least weekly. But hopefully this has been at least a little bit informative. I know my stuff. Again, this is where I ramble. My other stuff's a bit more structured. This is my practice round. Sorry, I'm playing my phone. This is my practice round for recording all of the lectures and stuff for the course that I'm doing. So thank you for watching if you have, and I will be back probably. I keep saying I'll be back this week, but I end up once we've like found a house and things are settled, things will be a bit more organized. But at the moment, I'm a bit reactive time-wise. I've got a load of work to do and I'm behind on things. So, and also, meetings and all that sort of stuff. But I'll be back probably next week. But yeah, don't expect anything more than that at the moment. But I'll get there. Anyway, I love you. Thanks for watching. And this is why, again, I have accepted the fact that, you can't make money on this unless you're going to be a cam girl for either side. That's the fact. Okay. And also because of the religious nature of both these sort of discrete cults that we're in, I have pissed off both of them. So they've both abandoned me. That's backed in research as well. Okay. So it's kind of an unforgivable bridge burnt. Okay. It's not just a block. You're never forgiven because that's actually a sign that they're radicalized. So every bit of the research indicates that both of these sort of, camps, I'd actually say that there's probably more now. There's sort of that blue and I call them blue and on, the corporate sort of online journo Democrat types. And then you've got sort of your woke kids, which are slightly different. They're just kind of, that's more weaponized by troll farms and stuff. But, and then you've got obviously your sort of distinct fox ecosystem that is quite, well studied and well established. So nothing I'm saying should shock anybody. And if you look at what I've said around the studies and that sort of stuff, you'll probably start to observe that is that feedback loop that you're seeing. And that if you get caught up in this thing, try not to get into that reinforcement mode. You see it happening with like a bunch of the TERFs now where they're just pandering to the right and saying all this shit they wouldn't have said a year ago, because there's obvious clear incentives there. And I just, and just because I know what it means to be left wing, I was somewhat protected from it. And I was also, because I've done this stuff for years and I know this stuff well, that I thought everyone knew because, this is the thing about the culture wars was everyone talking about politics is that I thought people knew more than they did. That was my mistake, was assuming that the people who talked about politics took it seriously and did some reading. They don't. In fact, most of the people who are in this thing are not readers. Okay. Yes. Anyway, I got to go. I love you. If you want to support me, you can. I'm trying to do more educational content, so you don't, but eventually there'll be something you can purchase at some point. But if you want to support me, you can. I don't expect it. Never expect it. Always appreciated. I'm going to go. I got to go. I'm late for a thing. All right. Bye. Stop.